Right. Well, good afternoon, colleagues, and thanks for coming to this talk. The topic is quite, I guess, not what we would usually encounter in engineering, but I just would like to share some of my experience recently because I was on the review panel for university grants on course development, and that particular grant is for pedagogical research, and so I just would like to share what people doing and what are they looking for, and maybe provide some hints on how we can also contribute to this line of research. So I guess there are lots of initiatives in our faculty on e-learning. Aaron is not here, but he's pushing a lot of this. Okay, so I'm sure here is just a partial list, and I presume you have seen this or heard about it, and maybe you are using some of this as well. Okay, Blackboard is a very standard piece of software that you can track the access statistics of students, whether they download the notes and whether they click on things, etc. Of course, that doesn't mean that they actually read it or learn it, but at least they click it, right? They downloaded it. uReply is this mobile communication system, right? And so you can have it in class and basically get instant feedback on the questions that you design. Okay, so it could be a quiz, or it could be just asking for feedback or anything, right? So this is a mobile communication system. Micro modules, I'm sure everyone is very familiar, that basically are snippets, very short videos, 7 to 10 minutes at most, on a certain topic. And students can go over it. For example, it teach you how to integrate a certain function, right? So this is can be a one micro module. And flipped classroom, that would be a more ambitious plan, right? So you basically ask students to do the learning at home, and then when they come to a lecture, it's basically discussions and workout exercise and so on. Okay, so and I know not many colleagues implement this, but some colleagues did try, and with various outcomes. So these are some of our e-learning initiatives. And so why do we need to do, or what is the need for pedagogy research? Okay, and here I'm just going to introduce several reasons why we may want to seriously consider this. Okay, so far I think there are mixed feelings on the effectiveness of existing e-learning strategies. Okay, so despite the popularity, despite that everyone is pushing it, but in our faculty, at least, I think it is fair to say that we all have very mixed feelings. Some like it very much, and they experience very good feedbacks, and some do not. Okay, and in general, it depends on the student group. Okay, for example, I know colleagues who implemented it in elite stream students, and the results are quite good. But some maybe implement it in a very large class, and the outcome is not very satisfactory. Okay. Also, in terms of knowledge acquisition, right? Do they really learn more, or do they learn? That is even a more basic question, right? So you have this micro module, or you have this flipped classroom setting. Do they actually learn? Okay, do they acquire the knowledge? And also, what are the advantages over traditional approaches, right? So, for example, if you ask me, I'm still a very old-fashioned guy. Okay, I still like to lecture blackboard and chalk, right? That style. And for me, this is new, and of course, there is not a propensity to change. Okay, so I would like to know whether there is really an advantage over the traditional approaches. So, and there are other things that one may be concerned about with these e-learning strategies. And so it all boils down to this question, right? Do they really work? Okay, so some say yes, some say no. So how do you evaluate? How should you measure it and put it in a more quantitative framework, right? So we are engineers, and so we should be particularly focusing on this, right? So so not just by feeling, not just by some qualitative feedback. Another reason why we need this is on the actual design of the e-learning component. So what is the most suitable, right? Do you use customized or existing tools? So by this, I mean, for example, when teaching foundation classes, right? When you talk about math classes, right? Vector calculus, for example. There are definitely many things out there For example, Khan Academy, they have a whole set of videos, and they are all these ready-made videos. Do we want to use those, or should we customize, right? Should we target our students and customize those videos? And this is important because although those videos are very nicely done, there are some feedbacks from students that say, well, they speak too fast, the English they can't understand, even though they replay the video many, many times, and they still can't get it, right? And sometimes they may teach in a sequence or cover the material in a different way from how we do it, and so the actual micro module may not be completely suitable for us. And also, of course, the format in terms of the design, right? So what is the most suitable? Should it be micro modules? Should it be flipped classroom? Or should it be something else, right? So here the question boils down to what works, okay? And so that also needs to be investigated. Of course, such a big topic, you would expect research has already been done. And so here is the question of the relevance of existing research. I mean, people from different schools, different countries may have done this kind of research, and engineering colleagues, there are many who are in engineering education, and they also did this kind of research. But are they relevant, okay? Well, some are, for sure, but some may not, because as you know, we all have different student groups, different language abilities, and so on and so forth. And so that is why it may be worthwhile to investigate this kind of things in here, okay, and do an in-house investigation. So for our students, are these measures effective, or what are the more effective things that we can do? So by now, you saw some of the reasons, and you probably identify with some of these experiences. But now going to the next step, if you are thinking about, okay, so well, this kind of research seems necessary, I hope you would agree by now. But then the next question is, well, this is kind of more related to the educational side of things. So shouldn't people in the education side of things do this kind of research, okay? Now, so I would like to share with you some statistics, very interesting statistics. This is from the recent university grant. This is Micro Module Course Development Grant Software 3. 3 is the third stage, which is doing pedagogy research. Okay, so exactly the topic that we are covering today. Okay, and this is done in January. The review meeting is done in January. And here are the applications across the entire university. Okay, so as you can see, all faculties contribute except us. Okay, except us. Okay, we have 0. Okay, so of course, when I was at the meeting, they asked me also what happened to engineering, and I'm also at a loss how to explain this, right? So education, of course, contribute, but if you notice from the table, they are not even the biggest contributor. Okay, medicine. Okay, they submitted 7 these kind of applications doing pedagogy research. Some are related to pharmacy, and some are related to other topics in medicine and biomedical sciences. Okay, Faculty of Science also very closely related to us. They also have some submissions. Okay, so what I want to say is everyone is doing it in the university, and some you wouldn't expect, right? For example, medicine, right? I mean, they are very focused. They have a very tight training schedule. They focus on all these curriculum things, and still they pay a lot of attention to the effectiveness of e-learning strategies. And so I think it is worthwhile for us also to pay a little bit more attention and contribute to this line of research. Okay, so this is so I hope by now you are convinced that this kind of research is necessary, and also that we should actually do it also ourselves. Okay, and so in the remaining time, so this talk will be not very long. I'm just going to give you an overview of this kind of research, what it entails, and so on. And so we can, of course, discuss and later. And if you are interested, we can definitely work together. But here, I think it is worth also doing in-house and study how our students react to this kind of things. So in terms of this research, so I draw my experience from the applications from the medicine faculty and the science faculty because in my thinking this is more closely related to our discipline. For the humanities, maybe the objectives and the measures are a little bit different. So I would draw my observations from the medicine and the science faculties from their submissions. So I think the general principles are these. Okay, so you basically need to design an experiment. Okay, and in this experiment, you want to evaluate two things. Okay, one is the outcome. So and the other is the process. Okay, so this experiment, of course, corresponds to what you are trying to implement as your e-learning strategy. For example, you use micromodules or you use flipped classroom. And then the outcome will be more related to how well the student learn. Okay, so that is the outcome evaluation. Now, but this is not enough, although this is what we care about the most, whether they learn, whether it is effective. The process is also important. So what is the process? It is how well they receive this e-learning process. Okay, so it is really mainly related to student feedback. Okay, do they find it useful? Do they find the experience good, or does it motivate them to learn, and so on and so forth? Okay, so the process is also important. So I'm going to talk about each of these items separately, and then try to, for example, give you some example on how potentially you can set this up and do some analysis. Okay. So the first one is outcome evaluation. So the objective is really to measure, well, you can either do knowledge acquisition, okay, so whether students learn from this use of this learning strategy, okay. So this, of course, is not limited to e-learning strategies, okay. So you can cook up something maybe more traditional and you want to see whether students learn. For example, in a traditional lecture, whether they learn this topic. The other is knowledge enhancement, okay. So this is a comparison now. So you want to, for example, compare student groups who went through the e-learning strategy. For example, they went through the micromodules and compare it with a group who didn't go through this kind of micromodule training. Okay, and you want to see whether there is a significant difference or whether they are roughly the same, right? So as I mentioned, this is a primary concern for us teachers, right? Because we are pushing this and we want to know whether they actually learn, right? And so here is a possible implementation. So this is a template, and I will give you a more concrete example in the next slide. But this is sort of a template that I extract from those successful applications in the grand scheme. So to start, they will focus on a particular strategy. Okay, so this is really on acquisition. Okay, this is the setup for acquisition. So I'm not comparing groups that went through the micromodules or not. Okay, I'm just saying, okay, suppose I implement it. I have in my class I implement micromodules. Okay, do they actually learn the topic? Okay, so this is what I want to investigate. And so typically, you will need a pre-post test. That is a big word in their field, and in the education field. The pre-test is basically setting up the baseline. Okay, so you want to normalize what they already know, right? So, and that is basically measuring the level of pre-existing knowledge. Okay, so this usually is given before the class. Okay, so before you even teach the topic, and you give them a quiz or multiple choice questions or so on. Okay, and that also need to be designed. Okay, so it is not just any questions. So a more rigorous setup would be each question is targeted towards one of your learning outcomes for that particular topic. Okay, and so they are linked, and you want to test their specific knowledge on that particular learning outcome. And so that is before the class, okay? And then you go through the class, or for example, if you ask them to watch the micromodules, they did. And then after that, there is a post-test, okay? Post, of course, is the measuring the learning as a result of your particular strategy, right? For example, if you use micromodule, afterwards, after they watch the video, do they actually learn the stuff, okay? And so in the setup, typically what they did is the pre-test and the post-test, they use the same set of questions. Okay, this is one of their setups. Okay, so pre-test, so when they know nothing, supposedly, and they do, and try to measure the pre-existing knowledge. After they went through it, they would do the test again and see now, oh, now I know how to do it, and so I can do this and this questions, right? So this is the post-test, okay? And the reason for that is so that you can compare, okay? Because this way you are focusing on the same set of questions, and so you can compare their actual learning, okay? Now, of course, there are all these other factors that may contaminate your data, okay? For example, they may discuss or other uncontrollable factors that may happen, but this is, in general, how they set up the test. And then afterwards, you collect all these scores, then you do a statistical analysis, okay? And for that, I think we are pretty well versed in this, okay? I mean, statistics and math don't scare us, right, in general. I think, and if the humanities people can do it and they apply this, and I'm sure we can also do it here as well, okay? So this is the rough flow of how you can do such a measurement. And let me give you a concrete example on how this might be implemented. I thought a little bit about this for our calculus class that every engineering student has to go through, okay? So the calculus for engineers class, of course it is run by math, but we are in close collaboration with them, okay? So we can ask them to help us to do certain things. So for example, here is the topic that I want to put out a micro module, okay? So my strategy now is the micro module, okay? I want them to watch videos. And say there is a topic on series, okay? On series, okay? And these are the micro modules on the individual subtopics. So maybe there is a 7-minute video on explaining what is a Taylor expansion, and then another video explaining what is a Taylor and Maclaurin series, and so on, okay? And so the pre-post test will be, basically, I design questions. It could be multiple choice or it could be written, depends on how we want to do it. And so we basically use that to assess the attainment of the learning outcomes associated with this particular topic, okay? So beforehand, it would be good also to set up some learning outcomes for this particular topic, okay? So for example, you want them to know how to manipulate certain things or be able to tackle certain problems of a certain complexity and so on, okay? And then, so this is what I said before. So the pre-test is usually before the class. Post-test is after the class, okay? So basically, after they watch the modules, they will do the post-test. And that is how you measure their attainment in terms of learning outcomes. So this is one particular example. Here is another way. So the way I just introduced is just focusing on whether the micro module actually helps in the learning. Here, another direction is you want to measure the enhancement, okay? So whether having micro modules is actually good, okay? So versus not having it, okay? Versus, for example, traditional board and chalk lecture type. So the setup is very similar, except that this time you will need to define an experimental and a control group, okay, just to set up the comparison, okay? But the remaining things are roughly the same, okay? Again, you do the pre-post test and then do a statistical analysis of the changes in the scores. Now, the most tricky part is on this part. How do you define the experimental groups and the control groups? So again, going back to the calculus class example, that one is rather easy in terms of setup because students are already divided into different sessions, okay? So there are, I think, 7 to 8 different sessions, okay? So for example, you can identify, for example, 2 sessions that have students of similar abilities, right? So this is important, they should have similar abilities. And then one go through the micro modules, one doesn't, okay? And then see what the outcome would be, okay? So that is one way to set it up. In the proposals that I read, they have another setup, which is, you do not want to do such a cruel thing, for example, with the same cohort of students. So some go through micro modules, the other didn't. So what they did is, so for example, last year, the course didn't have micromodules. This year, the class has micromodules. So they use the scores from this year and compare it with those of the last year. Okay. Now, but the problem with this comparison, there is some problem, and that is there will be a different question set, right? Because you cannot have the same exam in 2 years. And also, the two groups may not be comparable, okay? But nevertheless, this is, I guess, at least a starting point where you can start doing this kind of comparisons and get some preliminary indications on what is going on. So here is the example, okay? So I think I just said that. So for example, the experimental group, you can choose, for example, current students with access to micromodules and compare it with the historical cohort, okay? So then it will be comparing across different years, okay? Or you can have two sessions. One is with access to micromodules and the other is without, okay? So that is also a possibility. And I think in some sense this may be even more desirable because it is students from the same year. You identify students with similar abilities and then you make them go through different paths, okay? So that may be one way to do it. And of course, the measure, how to measure the outcome, mainly currently is still using examination scores. So that is one way to measure it and to get quantitative feedback. Right, so this is what Wing, I think, just asked about the process. So the outcome, of course, is important, as I mentioned. We all want to know whether it works, but we should also care about students' feeling in the process, in some sense. So it is also important to understand, for example, their attitude towards e-learning, and also some of the obstacles that they may encounter during the process, okay? So for this one, when I read through the material, I saw mostly this is quite qualitative. This is basically done by surveying, like the post-class satisfaction survey. Or this one, for example, access rates of course material. This, for example, if you use Blackboard, you can track how many times they download it or read it. Well, only how many times they download it. You don't know whether they read it, but at least you know how many times they access it. And you can also conduct focus group interviews. So interview a group of students and ask them how do they feel. And so this is an essential component in this kind of research. I saw all this literature, they all have this component. And the important thing is that the learning is not just whether they learn, and also the process, whether it is a good process for them, whether it motivates in some sense them to learn. So that is the process evaluation. I don't have much to say. So this part is really on student feedback, which of course is an integral part of any evaluation of this kind of teaching activity. So here are some closing remarks. I hope this gives you a rough overview of how pedagogy research is done. I know there are lots of gaps and holes or questions that you may have. And of course, ultimately, it boils down to the experimental design. Okay, so how do you design the questions? How do you design the teaching strategy? And in a way that does not interfere so much with the teaching process. I mean, you can create an experiment, but then it disrupts the normal teaching process. Then I'm not sure if that is a good thing. So that is why I said it is not as easy as it may look like at first, because there are a lot of things that you need to design. The questions need to match with the learning outcomes, and so on and so forth. So in any case, if now you are interested in doing this kind of research, and if you are planning to report this research somewhere, then one thing to note is you need to seek ethics approval, okay, because you are testing with students. So usually there is no harm done, so it will usually be approved, but you need to do this, okay? So this is one word of caution, okay? So because I think in engineering school, most of the things we do, most of the research we do, we don't need ethics approval, right? So we deal with machines, but for this you need. And I think this is crucial to our understanding of the effectiveness of different learning or e-learning strategies. And in fact, the university has very good support these days because they are really trying to push this e-learning strategy, and they have all these grant schemes that support you to start up, for example, developing a micro module, or doing this kind of pedagogy research, give you some money, and so that you can do collection of data and so on. So that is one can, I guess, seriously consider this. Okay, so thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all for coming.